If you needed further example of the insanity that is the encroaching of identity politics and critical race theory on modern cinema, look no further than the Oscars' new diversity rules. Under the new regulations, entries for Best Picture must now satisfy from 2025 onward 2 out of 4 of the following criteria, and where 3 specifically relate to on-screen representation. 1. At least one lead character in the movie must be from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. 2. At least 30% of the general ensemble cast must be from at least 2 underrepresented groups: women, racial, ethnic, LGBTQ+, or people with disabilities. 3. All the movie's subject must concern one of these groups. I thought about this in the context of my own favourites. With Glory, 1989, it would satisfy all 3, but The Shawshank Redemption, 1994, would presumably only meet one of these. As for Jackson's extremely successful The Lord of the Rings trilogy, it would not satisfy any of these requirements, therefore becoming ineligible. And forget about historical war epics like Saving Private Ryan, 1998, and even the more recent 1917, 2019. Fortunately, and based on the persistent slumping ratings alone, fewer and fewer people place any stock in the Oscars anymore anyway. We return to the medieval idealization of Los Angeles, Numenor, where Queen Regent Muriel entertains numerous ladies and their newborns. Suddenly, the island violently shakes and she sees a vision of Numenor's destruction. We then hear a loud rabble sharing its collective displeasure at the Queen having the elf linger on the island, and led by the same leader of the guild thugs that confronted Halbrand in the alleyway from episode 3. Pharazôn here converses with his son about statesmanship, and we then get a scene reminiscent of the South Park episode Goobacks.
They took our jobs! Yeah, they're down!
Despite Trump having left office in 2021, this subtle allegorical inclusion on release feels notably dated. Although I still find it fascinating how Trump continues to sustain substantial real estate in the collective psyche of the Democrat-leaning creatives. Just an observation, I don't care for either Republican or Democrat political persuasions other than in modest interest. But as an outsider, although I have lived in the great US of A for a time, this trope is a tired one. The writers further embarrass themselves by having the gathering chant, "Elf lover! Elf lover!" Pharazôn then intervenes, only to galvanise their resolve. We now have our natural foil established to our inevitable girl-boss alliance, our medieval fantasy Thelma and Louise pairing, if you will. Alicia, our namesake Galadriel, then shares the parchment discovered in episode 3 with Queen Muriel. She then proclaims her belief that Halbrand, or this version's Aragorn-Sauron hybrid, is the king promised to the Southlands. Queen Muriel then cucks Elendil. You know, that same Elendil and father to Isildur, and in Tolkien's lore, the Lord of Anjani, High King of the Dunedain, High King of Arnor and Gondor. But here, and as he replies, a pretty lord, actually. Now you may wonder why I haven't raised issue yet with the casting of Queen Muriel, or the repurposing of her character here from the lore. And much like I ragged on the tokenized approach taken when referring to Lenny Henry's defensive comments over fan racism, and the showrunner's persistent pursuit to brandish fandom as racist, while I find it boring here to have yet another generic strong woman girl boss, I'm giving the show the benefit of the doubt. I could reasonably suspect that Queen Regent Muriel's father's great-grandfather or great-grandmother married a monarch of a foreign land, and the genealogy has passed on through the generations. To add to the world building, they might look to showcase this, and considering their heavy-handed allegorical narrative to date, it may include a brief but compelling take on the trials and tribulations of past romances and inter-monarch struggles. Even a line, or a single exchange, could materially add something to the existing narrative and world building of this adaptation that would work. Sure, it isn't Tolkien's Middle-earth, but it hasn't been since the show began. And despite how often J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay tell us,
we, one, always back to Tolkien, and two, when Tolkien was silent, we tried to invent as Tolkienian a way as possible. Go back to the book, go back to the book, go back to the book.
And where they could have just built their own fantastical world without repurposing another's life's work.
Who hired this crew? This is undoubtedly the seediest bunch of cutthroats, villains, and scoundrels I have ever seen, so who hired them?
Her great-grandmother or great-grandfather may even have been a peasant, or dare I say a servant or slave, and this led to outrage, leading to class and race struggles, and then, inevitably, acceptance over time, or even banishment before a war to retain the throne of Numenor. You see, the possibilities are endless. Surely they wouldn't be so lazy to insert a character based on political motivations that undermines the narrative and world building just so it can reflect the modern world of today. Look, and before I move on for good from this aspect of the identity politics debate and its ham-fisted implementation regimentation within this series. Personally, I don't really care about different races and ethnicities portraying already established fictional characters, but I do understand why it bothers many fans, and generally reject the supposed basic sweeping notion of toxic fandom and race baiting on their part. If curious, and where I do care to draw the line, is when you take established historical figures and repurpose history with a fabricated interpretation to perpetuate an agenda. I'm also looking at you, Woman King. If you're still there, let us continue. As Queen Regent Muriel denies Alicia's proposal for Numenor to align once more with the elves, to present their support to Hellbrand and the unification of the Southlands, and then confront the lingering spectre of Sauron's return and occupation, Alicia requests an audience with the Higher Manager. We then get, "There is a tempest in me. It swept me to this island for a reason, and it will not be quelled by you, Regent." I don't think I've got much else to give here. Is Alicia the most unlikable television protagonist in history? I struggle to think of a poorer leading man or woman or whatever. I'm sure there must be one somewhere. Alicia is promptly placed in prison across from Hellbrand for sedition. Hooray for small justices. We return to the sea is always right, and young Isildur, who, and once more, gets caught up in a daydream for distant shores, and distracted, neglects the rigging and it unravels. With his friends, all three are dismissed from the Sea Guard. Naturally, his friends are not pleased. Back with Arindir and the orcs, our red herring Sauron, this elven Adar, played by Benjen Stark, mercifully eases the passing of a severely wounded orc. He asks Arindir where he's from in Elvish and reminisces of his own time journeying through Beleriand. Arindir's home. Upon completing brief pleasantries, Adar informs Arindir he will set him free to deliver a message to those Southlanders who now occupy the Elven Watchtower. We cut to the Watchtower, where our resident girl boss Bronwyn administrates. Running short of supplies, her son, Theo, volunteers to venture forth and forage for food. Against Bronwyn's wishes, he and another young man scavenge about an abandoned village. With the sun fading behind the clouds and the orcs resurfacing, Theo hides in the old village well. We cut away to Eregion, where the elves and dwarves have begun construction of the Great Forge. Celebrimbor and young Ned Stark reminisce, and Celebrimbor informs his suspicions that Prince Durin is hiding something. Young Ned Stark arrives at Khazad-dûm and he inquires of Princess Disa where Prince Durin has got to. She conceals the truth, but it doesn't appear young Ned Stark is convinced. Young Ned Stark ventures further underground where he discovers a secret passageway. Inside he finds the mithril Prince Durin had intended to keep secret from him, and he's caught in the act. An angered Prince Durin confronts him over coming down here for the mithril. Young Ned Stark counters that secrets only undermine their friendship, and Prince Durin requests he make an oath not to share of this newfound knowledge with anyone else. While the use of mithril as a MacGuffin, or mystery box, isn't the most inspiring and creative decision, the narrative with Khazad-dûm has proven by far the strongest in these first 4 episodes. The cinematography is relatively sound, the visual effects appealing, and through the relationship between young Ned Stark here and Prince Durin, and Princess Disa, I'm honestly curious where this plot strand goes. Unfortunately, we return to Numenor, where we get tedious dialogue seeking to convince us of Alicia's warrior prowess. "Are you really about to advise me in the art of war?" she says to Hellbrand. Hellbrand then seeks to remind her that the Queen's court is not your usual battlefield. Hellbrand continues to teach Alicia of etiquette appropriate to achieve her desired outcomes. In essence, how to become Galadriel.
This woman, however, is an imposter!
Yes, Hellbrand, is teaching Galadriel about appropriate etiquette. The Numenorian guards then arrive with Pharazôn, and a scene plays out like a rerun from Benny Hill. I remind you, this production had a budget of 460+ million. Oh, and grown men twice her size are swiftly overcome, even walking themselves inside the cell. Quite convenient. This might be, an outside of parody, the worst action sequence I have ever seen, and believe me, it only gets worse from here. With Alicia having escaped, she scales a tower, breaks in through the window to address the sick king. Queen Regent Muriel is already present at her father's side, and of course, the actor cast to play the sickly king looks nothing remotely like his daughter. You know, it's relatively small details like these that distract you as the viewer and take you completely out of the submersion received from a cinematic offering. So she was adopted? Is she the product of infidelity? They just aren't even trying anymore.
Hard knock life for us. It's the hard knock life for us.
Moving on, we learn of the friction that developed between the elves and the people of Numenor, and her father's reign succumbing to rebellion due to his siding with the elves, and his desire to preserve their allegiance. Queen Regent Muriel then shows Alicia of Numenor's pending destruction through a Palantir. We then get this largely contrived meeting of the minds. I know what it is to be the only one who sees, the only one who knows. Perhaps neither of us have to bear that burden alone any longer. While the dialogue is clunky, Alicia is alone, as her kin had become convinced that Sauron no longer served a threat. But here they haven't seen what she has seen. They haven't seen the parchment nor heard from Halbrand as a witness to the Southlands being overrun with orcs. Why would she not first seek their aid and present her findings? Is it because they'd again reject her? But are they really that stupid to do so? As for the sharing of burden through the Palantir, Queen Regent Muriel has the gift of foresight and knows of Numenor's impending doom, and the probable need to resettle, perhaps forge a new kingdom in the Southlands. But this comes with unforeseen risk to her people, and she hasn't sufficient knowledge of what awaits them there in the Southlands. And to the Queen Regent's merit, she does decline, rationalising, "Faith may bind one heart, but it is too fine a thread which to hang a kingdom." While she declines here, we know a team-up of girl bosses looms on the horizon. I just wonder how clever the writing shall prove that would lead the people of Numenor to follow Queen Regent Muriel. But hey, and regarding the plot, at least we're finally getting somewhere. We then return to the Southlands, where the boy that accompanied Theo wheels in what he's scavenged from the village. Theo climbs out of the well and evades the orcs that have gathered. One orc catches him, but Arindir appears to save him. We then have Arindir toward the rear, deflecting the pursuing orcs' arrows. You may recall that Adar released Arindir to warn those in the watchtower of his approach, and while he could not reasonably expect Arindir to head for the village, nor warn all those in his company to let Arindir pass through unharmed, I'm left to wonder why he released him in the first place. What purpose would it serve to send the people of the Southlands a warning? Anyway, Arindir, Bronwyn having also appeared, and Theo reach the clearing. No idea why the orcs falter. The sunlight and vampiric explanation is horribly confusing and inconsistent, and it takes them an age to resume firing. But they are effectively stormtroopers, so whatever. Back in Khazad-dûm, Princess Disa and some dwarves are singing at rocks. Disa apologises for lying to young Ned Stark. The king determines, and following a cave-in, to shut off the vein. Naturally, Prince Durin is unpleased with this decision. Young Ned Stark speaks of his father and how he convinced his kin to confront Morgoth, and provides counsel that he should not fall out with the king. Prince Durin then apologises to his father, and they have a somewhat solid moment, and an opportunity to showcase the passing of wisdom from one king to the future king. We then learn why Adar let Arindir flee, to issue the people of the Southlands a message. Surprisingly for the show, it makes sense. The Southlands sided with Sauron and Morgoth during the First Age. He intends to sow division in their ranks and draw more of his old ally over. We have a scene with Theo and the dagger, or mystery box, and Waldrick speaks to him of Sauron. "Have you heard of Sauron, boy? Do you know of Sauron?" "No." "Do you know of Nori?" Upon seeing the leaves fall from the white tree, Queen Regent Muriel has decided, and announces to her people she intends to personally escort Alicia to Middle-earth. She's banking on her own charm and charisma for them to blindly follow her in this endeavour, the cause to be the alleviating of their brethren in the Southlands. Like lemmings, many raise their hands to issue their support. "I will serve," they say. Unfortunately for the art direction, it does convey images of a true and unflattering history. I don't know what they were thinking, but I think you know to what I refer. Honestly, the episode is much better than the previous one, which I said was one of the worst episodes of television I'd ever seen. At least so far, I like the narrative that revolves around the dwarves and the development of the Great Forge. Adar is a somewhat interesting, intriguing, and curious addition. While meant to serve as a red herring for Sauron, Joseph Maul makes good use of the time afforded him as Adar, and I now have some interest in how the Southland narrative plays out. I've got nothing for the Numenor and Galadriel story. Unfortunately, this narrative, and the one where it persists to prop up the show's main protagonist, continues to serve as the weakest part of the entire production. Nevertheless, bring on episode 5.